Okay, so I'm going to start with the simple fact of we're just going to go over wild fish, right? Why would wild fish be important? So let's just use cichlids because that's what I'm actively breeding right now as an example here. Okay, so wild fish would be important for you to be able to, maintain proper details, such like that, blah, 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 blah. Seeing the originations of what that species should actually looks like. It kind of gives you a standard for what you should be pushing forward with in traits beyond getting the species, right? And so while breeding F1s, which would be, an F1 would be you bring in wild parents, you breed them, and then all of those offspring are F1. Is that the grand prize of what you should ever be shooting for? And is it really necessary even? The answer to that is no, actually no. It used to be, long ago, a mindset that F1 was what you wanted to shoot for. But in the reality, a true breeder breeding wild fish and just creating F1s and always selling F1s and then stripping more out of the wild and selling more F1s, that's simply not actually a breeder. That's not a breeder. There's no skill there past just getting a species to breed. But I'm here to say really firmly that that is like a blip on the map of what constitutes as a real breeder, right? A real breeder has to understand all the different tactics for achieving things, manipulation of stuff, how to cleanse a bloodline, like how to create a bloodline, how to maintain the bloodline, how to predict the outcomes of what you're going to be doing and why, That's a true breeder, right? So a breeder is never going to be someone who just hiccups out fish from fish that they didn't even, you know what I mean? So here's another aspect that is important to keep in mind with wild fish. A lot of people think that wild fish are like the strongest fish, but the reality of it is the wild is just a huge mix of all the good and faulty traits. And that is literally still nature working its way out. So with any breeding you will ever do from wild stuff, you're going to see the same, you know what I mean? It's like you're going to have some that would be just immaculate. You're going to have some that are literally producing trash for you. You could see a wild fish coming in and they could be just all bad genetic. There's no protection there as to whether or not the genetics of that fish that it carries is actually good or bad. And what I mean by clean genetic too is offspring consistent and no genetic illnesses or defects present within its genetics. It's not going to pass to the offspring negative traits. You can't guarantee that until you're actually getting into it and digging in. Sometimes those traits might not even express right away. It might take you breeding F1s and then F2s, which would be breeding the wild parents, getting all the offspring, which are F1, breeding those together and creating true F2s. So, more than likely, you're going to see a decent amount of reasonable expressions of fault in those first two generations past the wild. Doesn't mean that that's actually then proven clean genetics. Here's the kicker. It absolutely does not. So, and you can far outweigh like a lot of the breeding tactics for, creating bloodlines. There is such a vast reason for it, and the benefits to it are just immaculate. So again, it's kind of like you should view wild fish as in like important for being able to understand, the species and, kind of what makes it tick, so to speak. And, you could be looking at attributes and stuff like that. Those are all positive things, but you should still be looking at wild fish like they're kind of a haggard version of what you want to refine it into, right? So it's kind of like the Ruffins, right? It's not the end goal. So wild fish are pretty much guaranteed to be coming in with various illnesses. I find that at least for African cichlids, being able to treat those illnesses from the wild, so long as they're not being cross-contaminated with anyone getting fish from farms and such like that from here and things like that, then the disease management for wild African cichlids is actually not that bad. If you've experienced it before, those of you guys who don't know, I have bred an extreme amount of wild fish in my past. A lot. Actually, I started with all that. So I was present for the whole, F1. But the reality of it is, too, like if you look at Germany and such for all their quality from the past, it sadly it's kind of dropped off. Anymore, I don't even actually respect them. But just the same, though, because they kind of became like a Walmart of fish, but legitimately. But so anyway, though, they didn't get where they got before with their kind of world-renowned achievements, or even in like discus too. This all goes. It's all. So if they just bred for F1s, even F2s, they wouldn't achieve anything. They would not have gotten nearly as far as they did. And this can be said for just about everything. That is not where any of the world-renowned cutting, like, holy cow stuff came from. That's just getting in wild fish, breeding them, and hiccuping out whatever it produced. That's not a skill. That's not, so what? You got the wild fish to breed. Sometimes that's an achievement, but that's as far as it goes. It doesn't mean you magically are a good breeder. It means that you understood that species. That's it. So, again, a breeder versus breeding are not necessarily the same. It takes a lot of actual education and abilities to be able to be a breeder. A breeder means that you can be confident in taking whatever strides you have. Whatever comes your way, you're going to know how to go and work your way around it. You're not going to be coming into this, you're already going to have all of the prerequisites in line so that you do know, okay, cool, so I keep pushing forward. Oh no, something bad happened. It doesn't matter, I still push forward. That is what a breeder is. They can predict goals, achieve the goals, and understand the proper processes to be able to do such. And all the meanwhile, too, creating a stronger fish as they go. What that means is both actually physically stronger and disease resistance. Not prone for, whatever ailments might be genetically hiccuping out of the lakes, which are present. So, anyway, though, I think that's pretty much wild fish in a nutshell. Do they have a purpose? They do. Sometimes, if a breeder is not properly selecting fish, so they're basically just breeding to sell, like wholesale stuff, big farms just spitting stuff out everywhere. What it does is it creates a lot of problems, and it also loses a lot of features. It loses a lot of details that the fish should have. They essentially domesticate and dummy down that fish at best. So you kind of really don't want to be snagging stuff that's just loosely bred and everything like that. And in which case, if you can't find the species that you do want to work with and actually find something with a good genetic history and be confident in that, then by all means, wilds are going to be where you have to go. So, again, wilds can serve a pretty strong purpose. Don't get me wrong. It can. But also understand this. You could import, and I used to, from 3 entirely different collections, one species. You would be mind blown just how much, if you're really doing your job here and breeding them out before sales, and you're actually checking for genetic faults, not just even within the F1s, because I'm here to say really firmly, a lot can surface between F1 and into your 2s. So, and especially like 3 and 4, which is where you should then be doing quite a lot of work on them. But just the same, you are going to be you know, you should really be doing that history check in there with that before you're just shooting things forward. So, but you're going to find that there's actually a lot of waste involved in bringing in wild groups. And if you're actually closely monitoring too which fish are producing what, you're going to be pretty mind blown at the reality sometimes. Sometimes you're going to get a group in that's going to be really, tight knit, and they will be pretty solid genetically. And you'd be like, okay, wow, that group proved me really well. And that's awesome if you can. That's great. And it does happen. I've had it happen. Sometimes too, depending on the collection point, it can vary. Because of the population and what all has been happening, how much fish are being stripped out, and what does that impact? Because a lot of people, I feel like, just think that there's indefinite amounts of fish out there, but there's really not. And in the case of African cichlids, there's a whole lot of species that are dwindling very far down. And people got to understand too that doesn't help nature weeding itself out through only life and death. Right? So how many faults can exist in wild fish without them actually physically dying? Quite a lot. So it doesn't mean that they're going to die. And those traits can be passed in female, etc. You know what I mean? So it's like nature will not actually always weed that out. It's far from it, actually. And so you got to keep that in mind, is as the species get dwindled further down, it is not for the better. It actually is going to cause the negative aspects, because they are not being strictly monitored by man to get them out. So the gene pool is going to cascade down. It's going to get more risky, not less. So, one of the beautiful things about humans being able to work these things out themselves and monitoring all of this is we can be that helping hand on eliminating the factors that would be problematic down the road, instead of causing them to grow. So do with that what you want, but that is kind of the sad reality between a lot of this stuff and where it's headed. And the list of fish on cares going up, you know what I mean? It's like we really should not be pulling out fish from the wild unless if we absolutely have to. Me and my goal with this video series is going to be helping slow that down so that people are actually able to do what they need to do, source solid stock, and then run proper programs to be able to preserve the less fish we're taking from the wild, the better. And then also, just because you're running a program of this, it actually doesn't mean you're doing something less par. You're doing it more on par with what you should be doing as an ethical breeder and someone actually working hard on creating a solid bloodline, right? That should be everyone's goal, is creating an actual true bloodline and knowing how to maintain it. If everyone did that, holy cow, would the entire industry just be rocked. It would switch. You would watch everything flop over and it would just be reverse. And so, but that is actually the healthiest place to be. Not taking fish from the wild. Captive fish all actually accelerating in resistances, no genetic issues and faults that's going to hiccup down the road and all this other stuff, deformities, organ failures and growths and you name it. I mean, the list is huge. It's absolutely huge, especially with what can surface at these. You got to just really make sure you're running a good program. If you're running a good program, absolutely nothing will ever beat that. Like, seriously, nothing will ever beat that. And the security that you can create by running proper programs is just insane. You can literally run virtually indefinitely. So your goal realistically in the beginning should never be that I'm constantly bringing in more. Because when you're doing that, what you're doing is you're also bringing in the possibilities of faults. More. What's important for you to be doing is keeping in the goal of clean, 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 clean. Properly maintaining. So a lot of you guys that knew me, for example here, I had a breeder actually that was picking up on the betas when I was getting out. So I sent her some stuff and I told her what needed to happen and what breedings and such like that and where she would go. She literally got every single nail, just bam, 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 bam. Got right where I said, did everything swiftly, worked out great. Well, some of those genetics actually already had 11 generations in with me. And even by the time she had been getting to the end of what I had had her do, which would then be starting this tree here on 3 different categories, right? And so even by the time she got to the end of that, right, and this is all closed genetics, so those fish to this day, they will still state are the strongest fish of any of them. And they even went and tried like importing other stuff for different types. All of it. And they actually came back to me and were like, I just want you to know that these fish are actually seriously the strongest fish. I don't deal with any of the problems. And it's because I did my due diligence on actually creating a true bloodline and then maintaining it and stripping out all the bad, which was existent. So you are going to have to know how to do this stuff. Otherwise, you are not going to be able to achieve what you want. Or by the time that you did visually, it would just be a wreck on everything else. You know what I mean? You'd be selling people fish and instead of saying like, holy cow, I can't thank you enough and I can't say enough how much this just is really not the same as dealing with any of their fish. She got everything that I said she would. She got it when I said she would. She got, they were stronger. They were less susceptible to poisoning from ammonia, all this other stuff, right? They rock solid, weren't ever having disease problems and such. Like the offspring, there wasn't a bunch of runts. There wasn't a bunch of thin bodies. There wasn't a bunch of faulty fins. There was consistency in color. There was, and it's like, that's all stuff though that you have to be able to do as an ethical breeder. That is so far looping this back now to wild fish. That's the kind of thing that you can't actually do with wild fish. The wild fish are the beginning, not the end. That's not where you want to end. That's where if you have to, start, not your end goal. So F1s, again, they really should be looked at as tools, not your say-all be-all. They are a tool that, if necessary, would be utilizable to be able to do. So, again, wild fish, should that be your goal? No. And again, any real breeder is going to see this video and understand what I'm saying, like, already too. I mean, you really have to put a lot of work in order to achieve a lot of these things that you guys always see and then flip out about, or in groups where you're like, oh my gosh, that's like the best example, right? Like, so how'd they get there? It's going to take a lot of work. And if they did it well, then that fish will be very consistent genetically. It will have all the correct on and off switches present too. I call them on and off switches. I've called them that for years. It's a very good way to look at it. Like the genetics that the fish carries for each and every trait, you need to be paying attention to the parents and the offspring and the patterns that it takes and which traits are turned on or off and in what sequence, so that you can actually understand how to work those switches. If you can understand how to work those switches, you're going to get right where you want to get, right when you want to get there, how you want to get there. So again, it's also one of the ways that the Germans and such like that, they will be able to sell, like reds and such like that, but then they'll also, you'll get them and you'll breed them and be like, oh my gosh, I just got screwed. There's no red. They knew that there wouldn't be any red, and that's a whole nother topic, a whole nother video and everything like that. Asia does the same thing. I mean, for like I said, for any breeder, a lot of this is pretty common knowledge. If you're like serious, big track record, you're going to understand everything I'm saying right now anyway. So again, but this is geared towards the people who don't. And so if you don't, again, please watch this video series. I'm going to end this video now. I've flapped my gums about wild fish enough. They have a use, yes. Is it the end goal? No. It's only the beginning, and it's only an if you have to. It should be a last resort. It should not be something that you should be, if you need to reference proper patterns and details and such like that, well, then guess what? There's a lot of wild video on YouTube of these fish that are actually in the lake that you can see, that you can depict out, you know, what you would be looking for in traits and generalize it based on a wide scope as much as you can find as to what is actually key and signature per that species and what you should be shooting for in elaborating in traits. So you're going to be breeding to increase those traits, which would then be bettering the genetics. So anyway, though, enough about this video. I'm going to end this now, and I'll be on to the next one.